Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing again. Believing a power greater than what you are going through. When you don't know what to do, keep breathing.
That's right. When you don't know what to do, just keep on breathing. From the City of Angels in Los Angeles, welcome to all my listeners out there in Radio Land. I'm Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver, at caregiverdave.com, along with my lovely co-host, former mayor of a California beach town and best-selling author of, well, you'll have to figure that out, Debbie Peterson. Sorry about that, Debbie. Also
okay,
coming to you live, we'll talk about what you're a best-selling author of later. Also coming to you live and on demand 24/7 on numerous syndicated radio and podcast networks on 26 global audio and video platforms, including platforms like iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Vimeo, Stitcher Radio, Blog Talk Radios, the list goes on and on. In fact, we are proud to be voted #1 caregiver podcast of the top 50 on Player FM, and #2 on FeedSpot out of the top 60, and #2 on caringvillage.com. And we have an especially exciting show planned for today. John Suzuki. No, he didn't invent the motorcycle, but let me briefly introduce. John's not a professional caregiver. Rather, he's a regular guy who found himself as a caregiver one day when his mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. John is also the author of a new incredible book on the true story of concentration camps in America during World War II and the Japanese men who volunteered to fight with the U.S. Army while their families were still imprisoned by the U.S. Army, which sounds like a great historical book you may want to read one day. But John's not here to talk about his book today. Instead, I asked John to share his experiences with you as someone who had the responsibility of caring for his mother, and it was thrust upon him when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and the heartbreaking lessons he learned as he saw his mom's light fade every day until she finally passed away. But before we get started, I do want to take this moment to thank my last week's guest, Sherelle Mims. She's president and founder of Global Caregiver Network, LLC, the best-selling author of A Caregiver's Expression, an anthology. Just got to get the marbles out of my mouth today. And just a reminder, you can watch or listen to this interview and all our interviews on our membership website, caregiverdave.com, or any of our other 26 global audio and video platforms and networks that I mentioned earlier. Okay, enough of that. John, so great to have you on the Caregiver Dave show.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Dave.
I always like to ask my guests just who is John Suzuki and why was he placed on this earth?
Well, wow, that's a heck of a way to start an interview.
Right out of the gate.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a professional caregiver, as you said up front. And so just full transparency, I'm just a regular guy that was kind of thrust into the role. And here to share a little bit about that experience. But, it's interesting that you asked the question, why I think I was placed here. I think I have a really clear answer for that, actually. I think all of us have been, we all have different purposes, but I think we all share one purpose, and that is to make the world better than the day we landed on it by loving one another. And I think that if when all is said and done and in the final analysis and wherever we go after this, we can say, yeah, I did my part to make the world a little bit better and I help people love each other. I think we're going to be okay. Yeah,
and it's a shame more parents don't tell their kids that is their purpose in life, and there'll be so many wasted lives in this earth when it's all said and done, and that's what causes midlife crises. You get about halfway through and you say, what have I done? If I was never born, would the world ever miss me?
Yeah, the good news is that you're only halfway through, so you got another half to make up for it. So it's good. It's good.
That's true. Well, let's get into this. What was it like for you when the months leading up to your mom's Alzheimer's diagnosis started hitting you that oh my gosh, this is real?
It was really hard. It was really hard, and I just want to apologize up front in case I lose it a little bit. It's been a long time. Yeah, and but it's still very raw. I think it'll be raw for the rest of my life. But in the months leading up to her diagnosis, it was hard. It was hard because we suspected something was going on because we kept having to repeat ourselves, and it was not only concerning, it was really frustrating. What's wrong with you, Mom? White? I just told you this, right? And and she was in her 80s at the time. And so it was trying to figure out, what's going on here. And finally, it was my sister who said, we need to find a neurologist for Mom, and have her checked out.
Wow, and you did.
Yeah. So in a matter of about 2.5, maybe about, I was going to say 2.5 seconds, maybe 30 seconds. The neurologist said, yeah, she's got Alzheimer's. And he recommended a drug called Namenda, which he told us at the time. It was really interesting. He told us at the time had a 5-year shelf life, and that it would slow down the progress of Alzheimer's, but that once that 5 years was up, so too would be her life. And it was interesting because it seemed like almost to the day of that 5-year anniversary, my mom passed away.
Did it really slow it down? And did she have any side effects from it?
She didn't have any side effects from it. I think it slowed it down because we were able to spend a little bit more time with her, and she seemed to remember a little bit more. At least her memory didn't fade as quickly as it seemed to be fading before she got on the medication. But it was all about quality of life, and trying to figure out how to make her as comfortable and live as much of a great life as she could with the time she had left.
What was the name of it again, and how do you spell it?
Namenda, Namenda. Namenda. Yeah.
John, what did you do? What was your day job? What did you do when you discovered this with your mom?
Yeah, it was really tough. I've been in technology all my life, and so I was working for a travel company, and I was traveling kind of 3 weeks out of the month, and so it stuff like this never hits you at a good time. There's never a good time. There's never a right time. And everybody's busy. I mean, our society and the Western society and Western culture is all about working, and especially in the United States, our identity is all based around our work. And so it was really hard. It was hard for me to be able to take care of her. And at the same time, I was living in Seattle and she was living in Los Angeles. And so I was able to find a very good friend who wanted to take care of her, and who took care of her for the first year of those 5 years. And then eventually it got to the point to where I needed to step in. And so we actually moved my mom to Seattle. Whether that was the right thing to do or not, I don't know, but I wanted her to be with me. And I actually brought her to live with us. So I kind of took over, my wife and I took over as her caregiver.
How did you get her up there? I mean, a lot of people with dementia or Alzheimer's, are old and frail, and they don't like planes. I mean, did you go down there and all three of you came back, or how was it?
Yeah. I went down there and we drove back up. And we made it an adventure. I mean, we made it a nice little road trip for her, and so that she could see things along the way. So. Every step we tried to figure out, okay, what would be the best thing for Mom, and it was hard. It was hard because, you have this other life, called your life, that you have to live. And it just, it's the one thing that struck me about kind of being thrust into the role, there was nothing that could prepare me for it. There was nothing, and of course it was my mom, right? And she was an amazing woman. And I mean, she was, yeah.
Was your mother, I know you wrote about the concentration camps and the soldiers, the Japanese American soldiers who fought from the camps in World War II. Was your mother actually in one of those camps?
No, my mom was actually in Japan. So she was on the receiving end of the bullets and the bombs, the American bullets.
Oh my.
And she was the eldest of 7 children. And so she was the caregiver to, her family because her dad went off to war. But she was in Japan. My dad was actually fighting in the United States Army against the Japanese. My book is about the men who fought in Europe. My dad was part of a group called the Military Intelligence Service, which was a top secret group of Japanese Americans whose job was to decode, negotiate, interrogate Japanese soldiers. And the thing people don't know about that, first of all, a lot of people don't know about this group, but back then, the Japanese government considered everybody who was Japanese as a Japanese national. So if they were caught, exactly, they would have been they were shot as traitors to Japan. And the other thing was that as far as I know, they were the only soldiers, American soldiers, who ever had to have American soldiers as bodyguards so they wouldn't be shot and mistaken for the enemy. And so, but my dad was part of that group. And after the war was over, he spent time in Japan during the rebuilding and met my mom and had me and lived happily ever after.
So, I want the timeline here. So your mom was in Japan during the internment. But where was she during the Nagasaki and the Hiroshima bombings?
Oh, so okay, you're bringing this up. So she was in a little town outside of Nagoya, which was away from. It was north and east, away from Nagoya, Nagasaki, and Hiroshima. But I do want to share a very interesting story, and this is something that hardly anybody ever thinks of. But in 1973. I went to Japan. I was 12 years old at the time. And I went to Japan for the first time with my mom and my sister. And when we went there, we went to my grandmother's house. And as we walked in, she got down on her knees and she bowed to my sister and me. And we're looking at each other like, why is grandma bowing? And she got up and we had a conversation. And she was honoring us as Americans. I'm like, okay, so help us understand. I was 12 years old at the time, but I knew what was going on. And she explained to us, among other things, that the bombs that were dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima saved her life. She said millions, up to 1 million people, and I think she used the word plurally, would have died had those bombs not been dropped, because everybody would have killed themselves. They were ordered to kill themselves. And so because the bombs were dropped, the emperor surrendered unconditionally and told everybody to come out, right? And don't kill yourselves. My grandmother and my aunties and uncles, they all had their own swords, small swords that they were given to kill themselves. And so it's really interesting, as terrible as that was, those bombs shortened the war and saved million civilian lives.
That was the logic of why it was done, and
and so to hear from my grandmother,
it'll be debated forever.
But to hear from my grandmother and from her, I wouldn't be here right now having this conversation with you, So,
and it's so relevant because right now the book and the movie Oppenheimer is out, and there was so much angst surrounding all of that on both sides. So, we're, as you say, we're all people. We're all really out of the same bucket. We're not separate buckets.
And we are. I mean, somehow during the generations, I'm just going to give you a little math problem. Okay. I've come to realize that if you take 2 people, it takes 2 people to have a baby, right? then two, then two, then two, then two. If you take 2 to the, I don't know, 80th power, which is 80 generations.
Sound like a computer geek.
Right? Not really, but it's pretty cool. But that's 1 septillion people. There's never been even a trillion people. I mean, it goes billion, trillion, quadrillion, quintillion, septillion, sextillion. It's 1 sextillion people. And so you sit there and go, there's never been that many people on the planet. So how do you explain that? Because it's math. Well, you explain that by intermingling. So if you then take that concept of intermingling, everybody on this planet mathematically is related to each other. And, and by that,
most traditions say that.
Right. And so this universal energy, I am convinced the universal energy that people talk about is love. And so if we can somehow communicate that and convince people that, that we're all in this together, maybe we can make a good change.
And like the Beatles said, all you need is love.
All you need is love. That's right. But my mother, as a caregiver to her brothers and sisters, another quick story about World War II. They didn't have food in Japan. There was nothing there because everything was bombed. And so one day my mom found a peanut, and she decided that she was going to plant this peanut to make more peanuts. And so she planted this peanut and waited for this crazy thing to grow. And she waited days and weeks, then a month or two, and the thing didn't grow. And so she got really frustrated one day, and she just decided, you are worthless. So she yanked the thing out of the ground. And when she yanked the thing out of the ground, she found hundreds of peanuts. She didn't know that peanuts grew under the ground.
I don't think I knew that either.
Peanut tree, right? And she said that was the best meal of her entire life.
Wow.
Yeah, and she took care of all of her siblings, and they survived and thrived after the war. Yeah.
Well, karma. You and your sisters were her caregiver. And so she was getting repaid. And I always tell people, be careful how you treat your elders, because your children are watching you, and if you're treating them with disrespect and what have you, you're going to be the same, going to have the same treatment. So I know it was really hard watching your mother fade away. How bad was it in the beginning? And how bad was it in the middle? And how bad was it at the end? I mean, how fast or slow did it progress? And what different stages did you have to go through and change your strategies as she entered these stages?
Yeah. So the hardest phase was probably happened on the second year.
Really?
Was when I couldn't take care of her because she was leaving the house, and
she was wandering.
She was wandering, right? And one day she wandered out in the snow. And it became really, really dangerous. And that was, and this was 2:00 in the morning. And so the most heart-wrenching decision was making the decision that she had to go to assisted living.
Sure.
And so, and of course, she knew what was going on at the time. And I was
really?
Lucky. She wasn't completely there, but she knew what was happening. And she was a very Japanese woman in the sense that she was very obedient, and I was the oldest son of my family, and so she looked to me as being the authority after my dad passed away, and so basically what I said was what happened. What I said goes. And I never took advantage of that. I never, ever, ever, ever took advantage of that. And I just want to share one thing. I hear so many stories of people who feel and believe that their parents' inheritance is somehow theirs, and that their parents' money is the children's money. I'm here to tell you that from my perspective and my experience, it's your parents' money. And every penny that I spent of my mom's money went to her care. I didn't buy a car for myself. I did nothing. right? She didn't even pay rent. I didn't even pay any. I paid her bills out of my money. So everything I did was to honor her, and I share that because the back end of it, after all is over, you're accountable to yourself. And at some point in time, you talk about karma, Dave. Mm-hmm. That stuff hits your spirit. And so, it's all about if you are given the honor, I really do call it an honor and an opportunity to be a caregiver. It comes with a lot of responsibility, especially if you're doing it for a loved one, and in a lot of ways, even more so for people you don't know.
Sure.
But yeah, it was taken, and then so I put her in a assisted living center, and then she escaped. She escaped this.
Really?
She escaped.
Smart lady.
I get a phone call at 11 o'clock at night by the Seattle Police Department saying we're at your mom's assisted living center and she's disappeared. You might want to get over here. So I went down there, and eventually, to make a long story short, they put an all points bulletin out for my mom, streets of Seattle, and the police officer said, "Mr. Suzuki, you're going to want to get in your car and help us find her." And it was one of those great miracles that happened, but I found her very, very quickly. And she was about a mile away. She had walked about a mile away. And so, it's really important to find the right caregivers and the right people with the right facilities, because even after, that episode ended and we talked to them and they said, okay, we know what we're going to do now. We're going to lock everything up. Then I get another phone call about a month later, again, from the Seattle Police Department. And then I'm told that they had picked her up on the freeway, on the main freeway that was driving through Seattle, 5 freeway. And then, as I'm talking to the Seattle Police Department, my front door, I get a knock at the front door, and it's my city police department, Bellevue, wanting to talk to me about my mom having been found. And why was she found on the freeway? And are you an abusive son? And so the Seattle Police Department had taken her to the hospital, and I convinced them, and my sister somehow found my sister in San Francisco, who was also on the phone. It's just crazy. And so somehow she found herself on the freeway. This is a story of making sure that whoever you have taking care of your loved ones with dementia or Alzheimer's have a secure facility. And so I went and picked her up at the hospital, and then we found another place that was designed and built for folks with
wanderers. Yes,
I'm curious about the. You seem to have such kind, strong, wonderful values. Where did those come from?
My mom. My mom.
So it was karma. It is karma.
Yeah, yeah, and doing what I could to give it back to her. I think my strength and my the provider part of me came from my dad, right? But the loving part of it, the unconditional loving part of it, definitely came from my mom.
Did your dad need a caregiver as well, or did he go?
No, sadly, he passed away in his sleep.
Well, and that's the way I want to go.
Yeah, yeah, and I wasn't there. He was living in Los Angeles, and I was in Seattle at the time.
And he was in good health.
Well, a little bit of failing health. He had a tough health history. Of course, he grew up in a time when they didn't know as much about health as we do now. Smoked like a chimney, drank like a sailor. So
your mom was his caregiver, basically.
Yeah.
Among other people.
Yeah. and so he actually died of a heart attack. And, but he didn't go through the process of having a caregiver. The other thing I wanted to share was that once we found this our second place to take my mom, we thought it was great. We thought everything was there, but we later learned that in my haste to move her into another more secure facility, I moved her into a facility where the security wasn't there, but the caregiving wasn't that great. And so about 6 months later, she was failing, and they actually put her in hospice care.
Really?
And I talked to my mom's neurologist, and he says, you might want to just have someone go check that place out. So we had somebody check out my mom, and as we're in her room, she's dialing her phone. This lady is dialing her phone saying, "We need an ambulance here stat. Get an ambulance here stat. This lady is leaving this facility right now." I didn't know what was going on. She makes another phone call to somebody saying, "I am bringing a patient to you. Have your staff ready. She's going to be there within 45 minutes. So I'm going, what is going on, right? Well, it turns out that my mom the care that she was given was almost killing her. And she'd been constipated for 4 days. And the drug, they were overdosing her with morphine. And which was causing the constipation.
Sure.
And so this lady, when the ambulance comes, we follow the ambulance, and they took her to this adult home care facility, which was just a house. It was a house
instead of a hospital.
But it was a facility that was run by a woman who knew how to care for elderly people.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm like, I don't know you people. Who are you, right? And so they said, listen, just leave your mom here. You and my mom was in absolute agony. I mean, she was in agony. And so, all right, John, come on. And so they said, just leave her here and give us 48 hours. And so left her there, didn't know what was going on, right? And so came back 40 hours later, and my mom was sitting in this recliner chair in the living room, and it was like she was 30 years younger. Her eyes were bright. Her skin had color. She was smiling. She recognized me. And I just went, wow. So, and that's who she stayed with until she passed away.
Wow.
And totally comfortable, loving environment, people who really cared about her. And so we went through a little bit of a journey that I regret. And I feel like I could have avoided because I was always in a hurry. Because I was always working and I didn't have time, and I just take your time in deciding on the right healthcare for your loved ones. Because there are good ones out there, and there are not so good ones out there, and there are great ones out there, and there are really bad ones out there.
Well, John, it sounds, from the way you tell your story and from having spoken with you the first time we all met, it sounds to me too that a lot of times your decisions weren't even as much motivated by haste as they were motivated by an intense desire to an emotion to get things taken care of.
Yeah.
And probably the good emotions, good intentions, but maybe too hasty, not because you were in a hurry, because you had to work almost, but because you wanted to solve the problem.
Yeah. And thank you, Debbie, because it was my spirit was there that I wanted to do right by my mom, right? And I wanted to get her the heck out of that first place. Then I wanted to get her the heck out of the second place. But as I look back, I could have been more deliberate. in the decisions that I made.
So is that what is your advice to other people? How would you advise other people to avoid the circumstances you found yourself in, and not of your own doing? The failings of the people you took your mother to weren't your failings; they were their failings. It's just that you were the victims.
Yeah, they have these services. They're services that offer you recommendations and different facilities, and they're paid by the facilities, which is a little bit of a conflict of interest from my perspective. But at the same time, they're giving you names and providers for you to go and take a look at. Figure out first of all, you got to figure out what resources you have. You got to figure out the budget that you have, and work within that budget. My dad had left my mom with enough money to take care of her for the rest of her life. And so I had the financial resources that I could have spent. And had I known about these family care centers that are located in homes that are very, very hands-on, there are 5 or 6 people there as patients, and 3 people on staff all the time. And so that's 1 to 2. And so I could have, had I known about that, I would have put her in that. I mean, obviously hindsight is 20/20, but the biggest thing, and I say this in business and I say this in anything when you're talking about services, get references, talk to people who are there, talk to people who are there, right? And try to talk to people, try to talk to people who are experienced with their service. If you talk to people who are using their services today, they might not be as open to tell you the things that they might want to tell you as people who are no longer there, right? Who no longer have their loved ones there. Talk to those people. Find out why their loved ones aren't there. If they passed away, that's one thing. But if they're still alive and they moved them out of there, find out why. I think that is so references. References are good to a point, but to me, in this case, find references who moved and why.
Yeah. That's great advice, John. Hey, I can't believe how fast our time has gone today. How can our listeners reach you if they want to maybe ask some more advice, or maybe if they want to read your book? How would they reach you?
Well, thank you. They can go to John Suzuki, just like the motorcycle, johnsuzuki.com, and they can see about my book. My book is a Amazon bestseller. It's called American Grit. If they go to my website, they can learn about what I'm doing and what's happening, and get my contact information.
Great. Debbie, how can people reach you and find out what books you've written?
Well, today I'm going to talk about the latest one, which is Local Impact. You Can Make a Difference. And that one, you can get the impact. You can get the information at mayordebbie.com.
Great. And you've been on television promoting this, haven't you?
I have. I've been on, I was on a TV show this morning, and I've got another one tomorrow, and I've been on a few in the last month or so. Yes. All over the country.
Famous. Okay. Hey,
like you, Dave.
Remember, all our live shows become recorded pod and video casts on all your favorite platforms. My number 1 selling book, Secrets from the Hammock, Uncommon Wisdom for Uncommon Times, is spreading wisdom all over the world, and it's available wherever books are sold. Also on my free membership website, caregiverdave.com, where you can also schedule a free 30-minute initial coaching call to talk about whatever you're struggling with. 30 minutes of wisdom can often resolve a debilitating problem. Again, caregiverdave.com. And don't forget my Caregiver Dave Facebook online community, 34,000 caregivers strong, lots of tools, resources, videos, this radio show, and much, much more. And did you know that if you click the like or follow button on whatever platform you're watching or listening to this interview on, it helps us reach even more caregivers by improving Google's search engine algorithms. So a true heartfelt thank you to all my listeners out there all over the world, and to my guests and my co-hosts for tuning in every Wednesday, making us the #1 caregiver radio show on the internet. So until next week, same time, same channel, may God richly bless you all. Bye-bye.
Dave Nassani, the Caregiver's Caregiver, has just released his 6th book entitled It's My Life Too, Thrive to Stay Alive as a Caregiver. It was specifically written for caregivers who know they should be putting their needs first, but just don't know how. Dave is the sole caregiver to his wife, Charlene, since 1996. He knows firsthand what caregivers are going through, because he is one. He now speaks all across the country, offering caregivers his amazing caregiver support package. Even the airlines tell us that in the event of an emergency, to put your oxygen mask on first, before you help your child with their mask. They know that those who don't heed their advice often black out, thus becoming unable to help either themselves or their child. And caregivers are exactly the same way. It's My Life Too, Thrive and Stay Alive as a Caregiver will help caregivers who are neglecting their sleep, diet, and social life and learn to put their needs first. Pick up your copy today or buy one for your special caregiver, on sale everywhere and at caregiverdave.com.
Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing.